Hi, everyone. Like was mentioned, I'm Andrew Kahn. I'm Director of Product Design for Emerging Technology. We also have Rodolfo Agueda on the line. And we have a lot of interesting content today. We're going to start out with some slides just to kind of give a high-level overview. And then we're going to very quickly get into a live demo that Rodolfo will do, and then Q&A at the end. So a lot of really interesting content today, and we're excited to present it. So without further ado, let's jump right in. So we live in a world today where everything is connected. I think, us as consumers, everyone on the line, we probably feel this. We live in these smart cities. We have all of these devices. There's high-level estimates that 10 devices per human by 2025 is actually going to be a real thing. I think for probably many of us, we're already getting to that point with how many smart home devices and things that we have. This is great, right? Consumer expectations are changing and technology is changing and our lives are changing. But I think underneath all of this, part of the secret that maybe is not really talked about a lot is that the data is fairly disconnected, right? We have all these devices, it's transmitting all this data, and everything seems connected, but the data is, there's some hardships there. And for customers, these cross-company experiences are very siloed. If your company needs to work with, say, a regulator or a channel partner, potentially a service provider, it becomes very difficult, right? It's inefficient. It's hard to audit potentially, with that regulatory space, and potentially there's a single point of failure, when you're trying to work together like this. So, these walls make it kind of, very frustrating to collaborate outside of your business. And this is really why we think, we're starting to exist in this environment, the rise of the trusted network. And our viewpoint here at Salesforce is that blockchain is really an enabling technology for your company to work with, other outside organizations. Could be an industry peer, a channel partner, regulator, like I mentioned previously. And we really feel like, this is going to be one of the enabling technologies that connects all of our companies together. In a trusted way that starts to provide real business value and a differentiated experience to customers. So, if we take a step back, what is blockchain? I think that in our experience at Salesforce, we have a lot of customer conversations. We've been in business for about 20 years. We have 200,000 plus customers. So, we have a lot of really interesting conversations with folks. And the level of education understanding about what blockchain is, it definitely varies. And so, part of what we're doing here at Salesforce is really trying to humanize the language around blockchain, humanize the experience, and frankly, democratize the technology. And so, there are a number of pillars here. And Rodolfo, I think maybe you have some thoughts here about kind of the distributed nature, the verified and the secure nature of blockchain, and maybe you want to talk a little bit about this. Looks like Rodolfo might be on mute. So I'll just continue forward here. So when we think about blockchain, there are kind of some key pillars of this technology. If you're familiar at all with it, it's definitely distributed, right? You can save identical copies across network participants or network partners. So this could be other companies you're working with. That means that every organization or company that you're working with has a copy of the data, right? It's also verified. So only when the participants of, say, a private network verify this information or agree that this information is correct, does it get written actually to the database? So these are two important things. And I think lastly, security, right? It's always top of mind for us, especially for any organization or IT leadership or developers. We need to make sure that our applications are secure and our data is secure, right? And so I think through cryptographic technologies that are integrated into the core of how blockchain works, which Rodolfo will talk a little bit more about in the demo, I think it makes it incredibly, incredibly secure technology. And so we really think that these things are shaping the nature and kind of how organizations are going to be working together in the future. But again, if you kind of investigated, have been poking around in this space, you'll notice that actually implementing blockchain is very difficult, right? It's a very technical space. There's a lot of kind of subject matter expertise that's required, and these are just some of the things and part of the adventure that you have to go on in getting your organization to be able to get to a place to where you're actually providing legitimate business value leveraging this technology. So, how do you create that shared data model? Where does it live? How do you build it? How do you agree on what the shared data model is, right? Because we're now working with a lot of other organizations, so there's a collaboration aspect to this. You need to agree on the rules and the permissions that govern the interaction between the different parties, right? Again, going back to collaboration. You need to create this engagement layer because everyone in the network now needs to be successful in interacting with this network. You need to build a user experience on top of this. And I think, this goes back to part of what the theme here, I think, is that you'll see throughout this presentation and demo is that, we're really trying to humanize and democratize the technology. And we're doing that by making these things, these potentially very hard things, we're turning them into very easy things for you to do. And that's why in the later stage, the May 29th, I believe, at Trailhead DX, our developer conference, we announced Salesforce Blockchain. It's the fastest and easy way to create trusted partner networks. And so, like we mentioned, you'll be able to really interact with this technology in a fast and easy way, with a lot less kind of complex headaches than you might be used to in dealing with this technology previously. So, we're enabling you to declaratively build a network with clicks, not code. And that's some of the stuff that you're seeing on the screen on the right. Rodolfo will do a demo of this in just a few minutes here. And that's the experience that you come to expect from Salesforce, right? It should be really easy to build these experiences and these business applications that really solve legitimate business problems for you, right? Part of the story here as well is that because it's Salesforce, we're a very large platform. We've been around for a long time. Integration with the rest of Salesforce products and services is really key, right? Because it's not only building the network and kind of getting the scaffolding in place. It's about how this integrates with all of your other CRM data, sales data, analytic data that you have sitting in the platform. So we built Salesforce Blockchain at the core of Salesforce, and it's integrated deeply into all of the other things that you know and love at Salesforce. And lastly, we make it very easy to engage with partners, right? Because if we think about the world as we're now going to have to interact more closely with potential partners, other organizations, sharing data, we need to create a great experience kind of sitting on top of that interaction, because it's now about the success of everyone. And so we allow a very easy user experience to kind of sit on top of this potentially very complex technology. So what are we looking at here? This is more of a architecture diagram, and there's a little bit more detail after this. But at the very base, we've built a distributed ledger inside the core of Salesforce. This is based off of Hyperledger Sawtooth. If anybody in the audience is familiar with that, it's based on that at its core, but it's highly customized because we really feel like there was a lot of customization that was needed to really deeply integrate it into what Salesforce does as a platform. Sitting on top of this, we have kind of three areas of functionality. We're calling Blockchain Builder, Blockchain Connect, and Blockchain Engage. And you can see a couple of things listed under each of these. I won't go into it in detail because I want to make sure that we get to the demo as quick as possible. And there's some things here that Rodolfo will talk about that are really interesting and kind of key in terms of how you're going to leverage this type of technology into the rest of Salesforce and the rest of Lightning platform. So, again, just kind of reiterating what I talked about previously, we're very cognizant of making a very easy user experience for people and really kind of humanizing this technology while also deeply integrating it into the rest of the platform to make it very, very easy to get off the ground as quick as possible. So Rodolfo, if you're there, there's a couple of slides here. Yes, there's a couple of slides here.
Okay.
I think you might want to talk through.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much, Andrew. Really awesome context setting for what we're going to be doing. And now we're going to get a little bit more into the details, right? Before doing that, I want to make sure that that you guys can follow some of the key components of the Salesforce blockchain as we walk through the demo. So I'm going to be very brief here, but at a super high level, right? You can think of the product in these kind of like three different components, right? So the first one you can think of as a client, right? Granted, Salesforce is not just a client; it has a lot of other stuff, right? But in terms of interaction with the blockchain, you can think of all the Salesforce clouds and this component here that we've built that's new, that's with the blockchain builder, as clients that are going to be interacting with the entire blockchain, both the registry and the infrastructure. So the registry is what's going to maintain and where you're going to write all the metadata and business logic, right? And that's going to be kind of like the in-between the client and the Salesforce ledger, which includes, as Andrew was mentioning, Hyperledger Sawtooth, consensus management, which is really important, right? REST APIs, and a few other components. But we wanted to keep it simple, and then you'll see actually this in action as we walk through the demo. One final thing, if Andrew, if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide, you're going to hear me talk about some things that I want to make sure everyone understands. So if you're familiar with external objects, right? External objects effectively are like custom objects, but the key difference is that they're mapping to data that lives outside of your Salesforce org, right? So without the need to copy that data and to duplicate data, you can leverage Salesforce objects, or pardon me, external objects to effectively interact with other data sources, right? So what we've done is, in addition, and this is heavily used in our solution, in addition to that, there's these new concepts, right, of distributed objects. And distributed objects are very specific to blockchain, and they actually live on the blockchain. So you saw the registry and you saw the platform, the infrastructure, right? That's where actually those objects are created. That's where they live, right? So we're going to be looking at these as well. So I want to make sure that that we have the definitions right. Another thing that we're going to look at is platform events, and specifically blockchain events. So if you're familiar with platform events at a super high level, right, you can basically build custom notifications within Salesforce or also from external sources. So you can listen to events effectively, right? And blockchain events are a type of platform event that allows your Salesforce org and your Salesforce instance to listen to events on the blockchain, in the network where you are participating, right? So with that, let's get into the demo. If I could get the center right. Perfect. All right, cool. So to get us started, let me set the stage a little bit in terms of the use case that we're going to be exploring here. So Big Event Entertainment is it's a company based in Las Vegas. They own hotels, casinos, concert halls, etc. And they are very keen to find a solution to two big problems that they have specifically to their concerts and ticketing. So Big Event Entertainment has two partners, BlockNext Ticketing and Tickets Paradise, and effectively they are resellers of their tickets, and they're part of the network. So we've set them up here already, and you'll see that the Big Event Entertainment is the founder, and these two others are partners and they're resellers, right? Now, the two problems that I was mentioning that they are very keen on resolving is, number one, they want to make sure that there's a lot of ticket hoarders out there, right, that buy tickets in bulk when they go on sale, and then they resell them at pretty high prices. And that ruins the experience for for true fans, right? And even sideline some true fans because the tickets are just so expensive. So they want to get a better hold of that. And if you're familiar with international sporting events, there's a lot of rules, real world rules where, for instance, for the World Cup, whether it's soccer, rugby, or what have you, there are actually laws, right, that prohibit some of these things from happening, but they're very difficult to implement, right? So this is just one use case, of course, right? And the second component that they want to address is the fact that, you know, when you print a ticket today, right, if I buy the ticket, and then I give it to Andrew, and then Andrew gives it to a friend, right? Big event ticketing all of a sudden has lost track of who the concert goer is, right? They still potentially think it's me. Maybe they don't even know that I bought it, right? So that's kind of like a line of sight into the customer and being able to provide experiences, offers, etc., and really customize the experience. That is lost in the mix when those types of situations happen. So those are the two things that they want to solve, and they figured they would get together with their two partners to try to accomplish that, right? And they are using blockchain to do it. So let's get into some of the details here, right? So the first thing that you'll notice is the data, right? If you think about a blockchain and how it's structured, the data is very linear, right? So you have blocks, and actually we can even go into, technical difficulties here. Let me get back in. All right, we're getting there. All right. So when you think about a blockchain and how data is structured in a blockchain, right? Effectively, you have blocks of data. So you have text or you have numbers, right? It's zeros and ones, right? And that's great because it provides some with cryptographic hashing, right? It provides some of the guarantees that Andrew was talking about around first of all, security, right, with cryptographic hashing, being it in a distributed system, and finally being verified by the network, right? So all of those things come into play, but that's a little bit at the expense of usability from a business point of view, right? Because you don't have a solid data model that you can easily interact with. So this is one of the key things that we're doing, and remember we talked about distributed objects not too long ago, right? So effectively what we're building are these distributed objects, and let's actually take a quick look here, right? So here's some basic details, as you can see, right? It's fairly easy to create this. And here you're basically declaring what's in this object, right? And you're saying, okay, so here are the field labels, here's all the pieces that I find important, right? Field name, so on and so forth, and then the field type. Here is a really interesting feature, right? That you are, when we say that you're creating the metadata, it's also in a way a relational metadata layer that you're putting on top of it, right? Because you have these related entities, right? So basically, what this is saying is I have a ticket, and one customer could have many of these tickets, right? So that relationship that we had mentioned earlier, right? And let's take a quick look back here. Here is that customer entity, that customer distributed object that we talked about, right? There we go, right? So here's the customer object that we were talking about, right? And again, similar things. It has field. This one in particular only has fields and labels, but it's related to the ticket, which is pretty interesting. And Andrew and I were talking about this, how this really simplifies and accelerates the usage of and the use of blockchain data into standard objects, into standard business processes and flows, right? So let's take a quick recap. So basically, we've identified the business problem. We have assembled a group of partners to help us, right, resolve for it. And then we started creating the data model that that is relevant for this particular use case on the blockchain, which again is something that is not that common, not that I know of, at least in any of the other blockchain projects, right? So now the next logical step is, well, how do I actually infuse some business logic into this flows now that I have the data model, right? And this is where we get into flow builder, right? So what we're trying to do again is make it very easy to create some of the basic rules that allow this use case to live in the real world, right? And you may be familiar with flow builder. This is a simplified version of this, right? But I want to click on this real quick because I think this is really interesting. So at this point, we're saying, and this may be familiar to you, right? There are certain things that we want to allow or not allow when a resale, when a transfer ticket event occurs. There are certain things that we want to allow or not allow, right? And as we mentioned earlier, there was the issue around hoarding tickets and then reselling them multiple times over at exorbitant prices, right? So here we're saying we're going to keep the ticket prices when there's a transfer to a maximum of 115, right? And we want to limit again the times that this ticket can be sold at 3 times max, right? So this is another component that we think is really interesting. It's allowing us to add some of this cool logic to the ticket.
Yeah, and Rodolfo, if I can just make a comment here, I think too is, going back to some of the language I was using earlier. This is a very easy way to create rules and logic that's running across a network, right? So, if you think about what's in the ecosystem currently, this is, it's pretty difficult, right? You're going to be in, your text editor, code editor of choice, potentially, command line stuff. It gets very complex. And, again, going back to our theme let's make this easy to do, right? And clicks, not code. And I think we're seeing some of that here with how easy it is to set up these rules.
Yeah, and the other thing that we, in other use cases that we've heard or seen, right, is that when there's a switch that goes off sometimes in these conversations, right, where the realization of, oh, hold on a second. So before I just had a paper ticket that somebody could print at home, and it's a QR code, right? And all of a sudden, if I'm able to implement this, right, in this case, you would have a wallet, for example, right? If I'm able to implement it, all of a sudden, whereas before I had, let's call it a dumb ticket, right? All of a sudden, I have a programmable ticket. I have a smart ticket. Now this ticket can take actions, right? Whereas before, again, it was just, its only function, right, if you want to think of it in those terms, was to allow you to enter a ticket or a concert hall, right? Now you can infuse it with, rules, and potentially later on with, rewards and other really interesting things. So we really look forward to our customers to show us the way in a lot of these ones, right? About what's possible in their own businesses.
Yeah, yeah, and I think just one kind of more comment there is, we have a slide after the demo is done that talks about some of the use cases across industries that are really interesting. We're just using this ticketing example as one use case, of course. So I think you're probably starting to think for the folks on the webinar, you're probably starting to think how this potentially could apply to your business, what could be an interesting problem, and we'll talk a little bit more about use cases as soon as we bounce out of the demo.
Cool, thank you. So let's see how this actually works from a customer experience perspective, right? So we're going to do this very quickly. So let's jump into, let's see, one of the accounts here. So this is Dana. She's a customer, and she has, as you can see, she has 3 tickets, and she also happens to have a reservation at this hotel, Big Event Entertainment Palace, right? If I can get back. Okay, cool. So let's look at the ticket. So in this scenario, Dana wants to sell that ticket to somebody in her close group of friends.
And here we'll put in the resale price at 150, let's say. If you recall in our example, we had said that the maximum price we wanted to allow for a ticket to be resold was 115. So let's see what happens when we try to resell it at $150.
So the transaction itself actually hasn't taken place. If you see, she still has the ticket here. And that's because she violated one of the rules that we had mentioned earlier, which was, basically no hoarding tickets and then reselling them at crazy prices, right? So this is what happens in the front end. So it's immediately available, right? Both in the blockchain, it's immediately available. We'll see in the console, and it's immediately available to the customer as well, right? Which again, when you think about projects out there that have to build each of these pieces, the UI, the UX, the interactions, all that, we are hoping that this really helps simplify a lot of that and speed up the use case, right? So if we look at what happened here, I'm already in Dana's account, and you see here, let me refresh. So you see that a case was created, right, when she attempted to do that. And here again, this is a matter of choice, right? Whoever your company is can decide to send an email, send a warning, create a case potentially, right, if it needs to be further investigated. But the beauty of it is that it integrates seamlessly into current business processes, right? You don't have to build another app and another integration, right, into things that may be standard for, in this case, in a call center, for example, right? So that's in a nutshell how this experience works very quickly, right? And we were trying to find comparisons of, well, how much effort would it take to do something like this in other languages? So this is not a perfect comparison by any means, but just interesting points here. So if you were to do this in Ethereum, in Solidity, there's this distribution app, right? Ticket distribution app. And this one has about 100 lines of code, which isn't terribly bad. But again, this is just the main Solidity component. It doesn't have any of the UI, UX, rules, etc. that we talked about, right? And then when you go to Apollo, which is chain code, and that's Hyperledger Fabric, right? It's about 500 lines of code, right? And what we're doing here is effectively the demo that we shared effectively doesn't have any lines of code. It's all declaratively created, right? And again, we think that this is going to very much shorten the time that developers spend getting up to speed and actually starting to look at very impactful use cases and business use cases, right? So with that being said, let's look at some more code. This is, if you bear with me 1 second. Okay. Close this. Right. So if you remember towards the beginning, I also mentioned that there were, that we leveraged platform events and that we leveraged blockchain events, which are a type of platform event, right? So basically for participating partners that already have Salesforce, right? Each of the nodes on the blockchain it can connect to, it can make use of this functionality of, these are basically Apex triggers, right? So if you take a look here, right, we have an example of a trigger, right? And it's this PC event trigger, right? And anytime that there's an event within the blockchain itself, it will emit a blockchain event that's picked up by the org via this platform event and specifically via blockchain event, if that makes sense. So if you remember in the earlier screens, we created a custom distributed object called customer, right? So this is the entity that we're listening for in this particular code. And what the code is saying is that any time that there is a chain event of the record type customer, right, we're listening to that. And we want to create a new record. If we don't have it already in our Salesforce environment, we want to create a new record that pulls some information from that customer. So in this case, we'll take the name from the customer object, and we'll actually include it in the account name. So we're creating this account. So effectively what this is allowing you to do is whenever there's something that changes in the blockchain, then you can create business rules, right, that reflect certain information or that trigger certain action in your Salesforce org, right? So this is important when we think about coordination, right? When we think about if you have, let's say, a network with 5 different nodes, right, and somebody in their Salesforce org creates, adds 100 loyalty points to an account, for example, right? So they do that in their Salesforce org. That gets pushed into the node, right? And the node, in blockchain fashion, right, will distribute that information to all the other nodes in the network, right? Now, if you're not listening for that event, what happens is that you'd have to do periodic manual syncs potentially, right, to pick up those changes. But with this, you can actually completely automate that and make sure that your org can also be updated and any action that you need to take, right, in a supply chain example, for example, that would be tremendously helpful, right? So again, if you have a Salesforce org, you're running the node, all of this, the power of blockchain and the power of Salesforce is just multiplied tremendously, right? Now, but what happens, you may ask, to members in the network that are don't necessarily own a Salesforce org, right? So we thought about that, and part of the design principles of the solution are that we want our blockchain solution that be as easily accessible via REST APIs as possible, right? Of course, with the right permissions and the right security around it, but we want to be able to expose blockchain features to parties outside of orgs, outside of Salesforce orgs, right? And by the way, you can still use, of course, these REST APIs even if you have a Salesforce org and there's a custom type of flow that you want to create, right? So you're looking at Swagger AI, that is where we can take a quick look at all the different APIs that we have implemented here. And let's take a look at one of them just to give you a sense of what this looks like, right? So remember that we had a ticket, a distributed object, right? So what we're going to do is we're simply saying we want to get all the tickets, right, that are currently in the blockchain, right? Am I getting this? Oh, sorry, wrong one. There we go. So we want to get all the tickets here, right? So there's the call, and then what you see here is basically what's stored in the blockchain, right? And we're making a reference specifically to tickets, right, to the entity type tickets. And here you have a lot of information, the ID in the blockchain, the ticket number, customer who bought it, right? What version it is, whether it's version 1, 2, 3, if it was sold, etc., right? So if we were to take one of these now, let's close this out. So this is just an example, right, of what you can do here. So let's take this, and what we're going to do, and this is a question that comes up very frequently as well, how can you start building some interesting provenance use cases, right? Which is basically how do you track the life cycle of a product, the life cycle of a customer, et cetera, et cetera. So what I'm doing here, if you remember, I just took the ticket ID, right? And what I'm going to do here is we're going to look at the history of that ticket. So this is allowing you to query that, to query the blockchain, which again is something that is not trivial in a blockchain setting, in the blockchain environment. But we're able to do that here with all the metadata that we've created on top of it, right? So again, this gives a really interesting view of tickets, right? And if you overlay some visualizations on top of this, it could really bring your use case to life, right? Another question that we frequently get is around permissions and who can access what in the database, or in the blockchain, or within the API, right? So here, let me take out, right? And these permission settings that you see here, these are examples, right? So you can have read only, you can have read write, you can have sign, right? Sign all transactions, batches, etc. And even like this one here, manage permissions, right? So all of this right now is managed by the founder of the network. But if they allow for others to manage permissions, then that can be also accomplished, right? This is completely dependent on the use case, completely dependent on the network and how you want to set it up. But there are some high-level permissions and settings that can be implemented here. And in fact, we're working on much more granularity in terms of what people can and cannot see, right? Because again, privacy along with security is really important, right? So there are fields that you don't want, that you only want a subset of your network or of your partners to see, then definitely want to make sure that that can be respected, that can be useful for you. Right?
Yeah, and Rodolfo, if I can just add some color here too, I think it's just important to kind of verbalize some of this, kind of just what you're talking about, where what we're talking about with Salesforce Blockchain is working, having your company, your organization work with a private set, what's known as a consortium of companies, right? So this isn't necessarily a solution meant for kind of fully public things that are happening. This is, you might want to work with 10 different partners, 20 different partners, 100 different partners. The number doesn't matter, but the idea here is that you can declaratively set all of this stuff up, set up the rules, set up the sharing permissions, all of that, to govern this private network that you create with, with a set of business partners that you approve of.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, something that I perhaps skipped at the beginning, right? But there's definitely that distinction between permissioned and permissionless blockchains, right? And permissionless being the ones that anyone can basically participate, read and write, etc., right? And definitely, when we look at this and when we look at the B2B use cases, right, we definitely are working in a permission setting where the parties are invited to participate or are given specific access, right, to be able to interact with the network, right? So super important, and definitely, folks do ask a lot of questions around this because, of course, it's you'll be sharing some data with trusted partners, and we want to make sure that that you have a degree of privacy controls in terms of that data, right? So that is and as you can see here, there's just a number of different APIs that we're exposing, and there's going to be even more APIs that we're going to expose as the product develops further. Finally, what I wanted to do was perhaps take a quick look at this, and now that we've gone through the entire kind of like end-to-end, here's how this potentially looks with Salesforce, right? If we bring it back to your bare bones blockchain, I think that this will help kind of like clarify some of what we feel is our value adds to that, right? So we have the same examples here, right? We have big events entertainment, blockchain ticketing, and ticket products. And this is a representation of the tickets, right? Each block basically here has, and this is super simplified, so bear with me, but basically has basic information. It has the name, it has the price, it has the previous hash, it has the current hash, right? So these are, when I say hash, I mean cryptographic hashes. And what you see here is a number of things. Some of them were mentioned by Andrew, right? Number one, you'll see that the data is replicated, right? All across Blocknext Ticket and Ticket Paradise, everyone has the exact same data, right? The way that these blocks are linked are via these hashes, right? So the previous hash is linked to the to the previous hash. That this field previous is linked to the previous block's hash, right? And that's how the security takes place, right? So if I change one of these, right, you'll see that the hashes change, and all of a sudden this hash number has been flagged as non-compliant, right, with how this setup and how this hash works, because the rule is it should have, in this case, 4 zeros. As you see, it does not have 4 zeros because I changed the number, right? So, and not only that, right, if we go back to that, not only that, but the other nodes actually are flagging this as not a valid set of transactions. Like from here onwards, all this is effectively invalidated, or at least it's evident that someone tampered with it, and then the network can take the action that's appropriate in that particular setting, right? And what I wanted to also call your attention to, right, is that if you look at this, what I was mentioning earlier, this is just data connected to each other with hashes, right? So that is, it allows all the properties that we mentioned earlier, right? But in terms of it being usable in a business setting, in a way that is fast, quick ROI, and that can be easily embedded into your current processes and flows, that's where we think that what we're bringing on top of this incredible technology is really valuable, right? And we're seeing a lot of excitement and a lot of really interesting use cases on that. So yeah, Andrew, I think that maybe why don't we talk about next steps, and if that works.
We referenced a little bit, now you've gotten the interesting kind of the setup and, how we're thinking about the state of kind of this ecosystem and how we're building it into the Salesforce platform. We had the demo from Rodolfo, and, I mentioned in the demo, about use cases, right? You're probably thinking, okay, well, how am I going to apply this to my business? Potentially some interesting business problems that we're trying to tackle. Salesforce, like I mentioned, is in a really interesting position. We have a lot of very interesting conversations with customers, like many of you that are on the call. And here's what we're seeing across industries. And this is just an example of some of the conversations that we've had. In healthcare, we worked with a company very early called IQVIA. There'll be a link later on one of the next slides that gives you some more information about that. They're around the drug supply chain. In education, we worked with ASU, Arizona State University, on a credentialing application involving Salesforce Blockchain. And so there's just a lot of really interesting and really powerful use cases here. And maybe some of these align to what your organization is doing, and there's probably a lot of other things as well. And that leads me into one of our last slides here. Is we're in active development right now. We're going to GA this product in 2020, and in order for us to get to that point, we're looking for design partners to work with very closely. The design partner program is a way for us to work with your organization in a very kind of no nonsense collaborative way, where it's very psychologically safe. We can ask stupid questions. We, as a Salesforce product team, get to learn about your use case. And get feedback from you about what's working and what's not working. And then for you and your organization, maybe you're part of a CTO team, an IT team, an innovation team. You get to learn about what we're building. You get to potentially get a first mover advantage in a lot of this space, and it's free. What does the typical profile look like for design partner? Here's just some things here that we've noticed. Won't take the time to kind of read through all of these, but you should have a Salesforce footprint. We generally like to have some type of executive sponsorship on your side, but in general, the program is very, very flexible, and it's usually meant to meet the needs of your organization, because each organization is different with their level of understanding of this technology. Their footprint is different, and their use cases are going to be different. So just take this as a general guidepost, but overall, we try to create this design partner program that is very flexible to the needs of your organization. So this is the last slide here, and then we're going to, looks like we have about 11 minutes for Q&A. I'll just pause here briefly to take so everyone can take a screenshot if they need. But there's a bunch of links here where you can learn more about this. There's Trailhead stuff. There's videos about our launch and some of the launch partners that we worked with, like S&P Global, IQVIA, ASU, and Caesars. So maybe just give one more second for those screenshots. And with that, I think let's bounce into Q&A.
Okay, thanks for that, Andrew. First question, what technologies are using under the hood?
That's a great question. I'm not sure, Rodolfo, if you want to field it?
Yes, I was on mute. So in terms of the technology that we're using, as we mentioned earlier, it is mainly Hyperledger Sawtooth that is heavily customized, right? In terms of the nodes in the proof of concept stages, we're looking at leveraging AWS. There's some others that we're considering as well. But really, those are the two key components. And then, of course, what you saw around all the technology that we are driving from the Salesforce side, right? Kind of like exactly what you'd expect from the platform. Basically, we mentioned distributed objects, platform events, etc. So those are the components, like the main components.
Can you share some good use cases as well?
So I think aside from the ones that Andrew shared, we're looking at. There's a lot of interest. Credentialing definitely there's a lot of interest in, and that cuts across not only educational credentialing for college students, but in the medical field, in even like technicians, etc. Just credentialing across organizations, networks, states, etc. That is a big problem. So that having kind of like a standardized ledger helps with. Supply chain, I think, is another one, and in more specifically, the ones that we're seeing that make sense, that have a strong customer engagement component, are related to provenance, right? And basically tracking the life cycle of a particular good or of a particular digital or real world asset, right? Then I think that those are probably, in terms of big buckets, those are the ones that we've seen a lot. But there's a lot more. I mean, probably a few times a week we talk to somebody that has a completely new use case in a niche area. I don't know, Andrew, if you have any additional thoughts on that.
I mean, I think that's a good high-level overview. What I would say is, there's probably some themes across use cases too that, when you leave the webinar and you go back to your organizations and start thinking about maybe what you can do with this. I think there's some themes like, do we want to change the nature of how we work with organizations, outside of our company? I think that's probably a big driver here in a lot of this, right? If I want to change the nature of how I'm working with somebody else, share data securely, maybe have a different type of ownership model around that data. There's a lot of interesting questions or problems that can be solved with this technology. I think it's just, look for those themes where the nature of the relationship, I think, needs to change, or you want it to change in the future with the partners that you're working with.
How does consensus in Salesforce Blockchain work?
So one of the reasons actually why we chose Sawtooth was because it has this thing called dynamic consensus or pluggable consensus. And if you're familiar with the different consensus approaches, right, in blockchain, you may be familiar with proof of work, which is very energy intensive. So all the ones that Sawtooth provides are much more efficient in that way. So and effectively, whoever is in the network or the consortium can decide which one is most appropriate. We have proof of elapsed time, for example, RAF. We have a proof of elapsed time that's actually executed in SGX, which is a secure enclave, and that's basically hardware, right? That segregates the logic from, or rather the connections, right, from systems in your node from this specific area. So there's definitely a lot of different ways that Sawtooth allows you to do that, and yeah, we feel that it's energy efficient and it's flexible enough that it will fit most, if not all, use cases.
Great. Why use blockchain over a traditional database?
Yeah, I'm happy to give my thoughts there. So that's a really good question, and frankly, that's one of the questions that when we start having conversations with design partners or potential design partners, that's one of the questions that we ask frequently within the next probably the first 1 or 2 meetings. Right? Like, why blockchain? Because that's really important to zero in on, so that you can also quantify the value, right? So what I would say is, when you are operating in an environment with people or with companies who need to cooperate, but there's not necessarily like full trust, right? It's not like you're just sending information to someone within your organization, for example, right? Those are the use cases, as Andrew was mentioning, that I think make the most sense, right? Situations where there's definitely that there are inefficiencies, there clunkiness that could be remediated by more trust-based relationships and, frankly, daily interactions, right? Those are really powerful use cases. But I'll let Andrew also chime in on this one.
Yeah, I think that was a good answer. I just go back to what I mentioned before is, I think it's our goal to kind of abstract away the technology decision potentially in this around blockchain, right? We're kind of in this phase of infrastructure building, I think, as an ecosystem, and I think you're starting to see that theme from us where we're creating these experiences, these user experiences that sit on top of this that allow you to solve a business problem, and potentially collaborate with partners in a way that you've never been able to do before, leveraging an underlying technology. But I think moving forward, it's probably going to be less of a technology decision and more of around like how are we actually going to go and solve this problem with a platform like Salesforce. So again, I think the question is interesting. It's interesting now because we're at a point in time where we have to ask these questions. But I think moving forward, if Salesforce, it's a product team, we do our jobs correctly, like that decision should be potentially abstracted away and moving more towards just how are we going to solve the problem and what value we're driving for our business and our customers.
And it looks like we have time for one final question. Is it possible to expose the Salesforce blockchain transaction data to external applications?
Yes, absolutely. It's again the consortium is going to have to decide what the right permissions and policies are, right? But once that's defined with the REST APIs, it should be easy to do, and that's the intent. We don't expect users to run nodes and to own Salesforce nodes, right? So yeah.
Great, thank you for that, and really appreciate both Rodolfo and Andrew taking the time out of their schedule to talk with us about Salesforce Blockchain. Thank you for joining us. We hope that you attend more of our webinars in the future. Enjoy the rest of your day.